Welcome to the Plant Trainers Podcast, where we're helping people improve their quality of life through nutrition and fitness. And now, your hosts, nutrition and wellness coaches, international speakers, Adam and Shoshana Chaim.
Hey, I'm Adam Chaim.
And I'm Shoshana Chaim, and we are
Propelled by Plants. Today we bring to you episode 245, Expensive, Weird, and Complicated, with Victoria Moran and JL Fields.
In today's episode of the Plant Trainers Podcast, we talk to Victoria Moran and JL Fields, the co-authors of the Main Street Vegan Academy Cookbook. We discuss some of the basic philosophies people identify with in the vegan or plant-based lifestyles. It's interesting how individual journeys change people, and although an overall goal may always be pretty much the same, core values can transform. Of course, we talk about food, hacks for chopping the bills, and we discuss one lucky lobster. We also get into a bit of a debate when it comes to the topic of health and veganism, but you'll have to listen a little bit more for that. Just remember, if you haven't subscribed already, head to Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to your podcast and be sure to subscribe now. You can always catch us on Spotify too.
Victoria Moran is a vegan for over 3 decades, and she was voted PETA's Sexiest Vegan over 50 in 2016. Listed by VegNews among the top 10 living vegetarian authors, she's written 12 books, including The Love-Powered Diet, The Good Karma Diet, the international bestseller Creating a Charmed Life, and the iconic Main Street Vegan, whose fans include Bill Clinton and Ellen DeGeneres, and also won the Best of Vegan 2017 contest in the book category. Victoria was featured twice on Oprah. She hosts the award-winning Main Street Vegan show on Unity Online Radio. She is also a producer of the upcoming documentary from filmmaker Thomas Wade Jackson, The Compassion Project. JL Fields is a newspaper writer, magazine columnist, speaker, culinary instructor, lifestyle coach, activist, and radio personality. She's the author of VegNews Magazine's 2017 Cookbook of the Year, The Vegan Air Fryer, Vegan Pressure Cooking, and co-author of Vegan for Her, and is the founder and director of the Colorado Springs Vegan Cooking Academy. She's also a brands consultant for a variety of national companies. JL did her culinary training at the National Gourmet Institute and the Christina Perello School of Natural Cooking and Integrative Health Studies. She is a Main Street Vegan Academy certified vegan lifestyle coach and educator, and a certified Food for Life instructor with PCRM. She writes and broadcasts from Colorado Springs, Colorado. We want to thank everyone for their support with the Yummy Foods activity book for kids that we recently published and is now available on Amazon and Kindle. We know it's being used in homeschooling programs as community outreach materials, as well as a way to keep kids busy, learning, and having fun without electronics. We wanted to share a few testimonials. Happy customers have left. And this one's from Jessica.
I love learning about new foods. Still being a fairly new vegan family, I would love for them to learn even more. I was pleasantly surprised when we received the workbooks and every one of my children, ages 1, 3, 8, 10, 12, and 16 took interest. Wow. Well done, Shoshana and Adam. This book is interesting, fun, informative, and I feel good about the fact that my kids are not only wanting to play with it, but they are learning at the same time. Win-win.
This one's from Timothy.
The recipe activities are great. No stress. It's a way to bond with your kids in the kitchen and teach basic kitchen skills. I recommend it for homeschooling, church-based programs, and presentations to elementary school kids. The worksheets can also be used as fun activities to test basic food literacy knowledge in adult-based presentations.
To get yourself or a young one a copy, visit the link in our show notes, which is planttrainers.com/yummyfoods, or search Yummy Foods on your country's Amazon site. And now for a moment of gratitude.
I had to wake up my daughter the other day. She's usually up fairly early in the morning. She's usually up before the rest of us. And if she isn't, there's no reason to get her up. But I actually had to go into her room, snuggle with her, warm under the covers, and wake her up in the morning. And that was just a really great opportunity. And I'm glad that I was able to do that.
So for the past few weeks, I've been doing some nutrition classes with my students at school and teaching them about new foods they're not familiar with, and we've been putting together some recipes. It's been a lot of fun, and they really enjoyed it, so I'm just grateful for that opportunity to share food with them.
Victoria Moran and JL Fields, thank you both so much for joining us on the Plant Trainers podcast today.
Well, thanks for having us.
It's great to be here.
There's so many of us, so I hope that everybody listening could keep track of who everybody is. We normally have 3 people, and we've done 4 people from time to time, but usually not 2 women at the same time. So there'll be 3 of us that they'll have to distinguish between, but I'm sure they'll have no problem figuring it out. They could start to get your voices now. I'll ask you both if you would share a moment of gratitude with us and the listeners. So JL, why don't you start, since you're new to the show?
Oh, well, today I'm grateful for sunny skies in Colorado. When I moved here 5 years ago, everyone thought I was crazy because of the winters, but East Coast is getting hammered, and I am looking at Pikes Peak with a gorgeous sunset and couldn't be happier.
Adam's shaking his head. He's glad you're grateful for that, and he's glad you enjoy that.
That's right.
But being up here in Canada...
It snowed again today. It's enough already.
And Victoria, what about you?
Oh, I am eternally grateful for my dog Forbes, who's named Forbes because he's one of the 500 best dogs. That's really true. And I'm grateful to my daughter because she insisted, Mom, you need a dog. And the love is so pure and so true. And when I look into his eyes, I see God because there's nobody else there.
Beautiful. Yeah, pets definitely play a big role in our lives. And a lot of people, I love seeing pets that are being brought out into malls and being trained to help people out. You know what I mean? For training dogs and what do you call them?
Guide dogs?
Service dogs.
Service dogs, guide dogs. I think it's so wonderful that people take their time to train dogs to be able to do that to help humans, because us as humans, we're doing so much to help the animals, and it's nice to have that exchange of energy as well, and to see, even if they're not a trained service dog, how much energy and positivity that they bring into our lives as well.
They do that.
So we wanted to say congratulations on the new book, The Main Street Vegan Academy. It's a great work of art that the two of you have put together, along with all of the other students from the Main Street Vegan Academy. And we kind of wanted to just start off by knowing what inspired that book, what kind of triggered that book to be made.
Well, it just kind of triggered and re-triggered, right, JL?
Definitely.
So JL attended the very first Main Street Vegan Academy class in 2012. And for those who aren't familiar with the Academy, it's an in-person course in New York City that trains and certifies people who are already vegan or plant-based to be vegan lifestyle coaches and educators. So after JL came, and she was already blogging, and she was already going to be doing part of the book with Jenny Messina, Vegan for Her. And then she just went out into the world, and her whole business and her whole vegan life just caught on fire. And so she started coming back to the academy to teach one of our business courses. And every time we'd see each other, we'd say, yeah, there needs to be a cookbook. And finally, a couple of summers ago in Colorado, we just sat in one of those extra rooms, you know, when you're at the Residence Inn or one of those places, they give you a room to sit and write books. And we just laid out the proposal, and here we are.
Wow. How long did that take to lay out that proposal?
I think we took about a year, didn't we, Victoria?
I think all together we did. I think maybe we wrote it more quickly than that, but by the time, you know, the agent got us a publisher and all that, it was a year from sitting in the Residence Inn to knowing that we had a book in the works.
And even leading up to the Residence Inn, we really just kept talking back and forth via email or when we'd see each other in New York about what we thought that book could be. And I just think that's so cool because then when we did sit down that night, we were clear about what the vision was for this book. And while titles changed and maybe some different subheadings changed within the book, the intent of the book for the content never wavered, which makes me very happy.
That's amazing. Don't you find sometimes when you're writing a proposal for a book that the proposal takes longer to write than the book itself?
Sometimes.
When I teach writing classes, people who want to write their first nonfiction book, I tell them that the proposal has to be better than the book because you want to get an advance. You know, you want to get a few $1,000s anyway to write this book, and it's going to sell for what, 20? And so that's how much better the proposal has to be.
Yeah.
Well, they say you don't get rich off the books that you sell, but this book is definitely a good memoir for you guys, putting together a whole bunch of recipes from your coaches that you've trained and from your students. And it's just a beautiful collection of great work that you've put together.
Oh, thank you. Well, we're very proud of it because it really is a guide. You know, it's a cookbook, and it's a fabulous cookbook, amazing recipes. And yet it's also a guide to being vegan. You know how people always say, well, what if you were on a desert island? Wouldn't you eat the rabbit? Well, I'm going to ask a question like that. What if you were on a desert island and you could only have one book? Would you want to have a book about being vegan or about recipes? Well, we've provided both. And we just want to make it fun, and we also want to make it realistic. I think one of the things that JL and I are both so much about in the work that we do with people is that whoever you are, whatever you do, whatever your income, whatever your zip code or your postal code, you can do this. You just kind of work it around so that it fits your life.
And I think that goes out for anything that you want to do. There's always excuses about why you can't write your book, why you can't start your business, why you can't leave your day job, why you can't go vegan, why you can't go plant-based. We make excuses for the things that we're just not ready to do yet. And we've seen people do this all over the country, in the Panhandle, places where it's just unheard of, it's unseen, they don't get all of these beautiful fruits and vegetables on a regular basis. People are doing it all over, and it definitely is possible. And when we first got the book, I flipped through it, and I normally have a rule, and our listeners know that usually when I open a cookbook, if there's no picture, I don't make the recipe. I'm very visual. I like to see what it's supposed to look like when I'm done. But when I opened the cookbook and I saw lemon Dijon tempeh and mushrooms, I need to tell you that was for dinner within a week.
I think it was that night. I don't even think you waited a week.
I think there was something I needed to buy, but I think I didn't have mushrooms, and that was like the one thing that I didn't have. But I had the tempeh in the freezer; everything was ready to go, and it was delicious. So there's something for everyone in this book, whether they're newly vegan, whether they are vegan for a while, or whether they're completely plant-based, whole food plant-based. There's something that you can find in the book, and it was really a beautiful book to look through. I like looking at pictures.
Oh, and our photographer, Jackie Sobin, she's incredible. I mean, she blogs in her own right at Vegan Yak Attack. And, you know, it's takes a real talent for someone to take a recipe. You know, a lot of people don't know with cookbooks that most of the time the photographer is doing the recipes. Like, we're not there. The recipe creators aren't there. And so it's kind of a way that it tests your recipes because they get to make them. And so did we write it well? Did it communicate it well? And then for her to be able to make them well and make them so beautiful is just a bonus to it, because we do eat with our eyes first, and pictures matter in a cookbook.
So as you mentioned, it is a guide as well. And in the beginning of the book, you talk about the different aspects of being vegan. So the environmental ethics, the health reasons, the human rights, the wave of the future, and spirituality. So what I wanted to know is if you can explain for a minute the spirituality part, because I think a lot of it makes sense, but the spirituality part is something that maybe common sense doesn't bring us to, and we need to have a better understanding about.
I think we used to talk more about the spirituality in veganism when I was first looking at it 40 years ago. It's very much a part of most spiritual traditions, the idea of nonviolence and reverence for life. And this really just comes to fruition in a vegan lifestyle. And certainly anybody who is into yoga, if you look there, you find ahimsa, this whole idea of nonviolence. And then if you also look back in the yogic tradition, the yogis were the first nutritionists, and they were looking for what kind of diet could best support people who want to meditate for long periods, for people who really want to be serious about their spiritual lives. And they decided that you didn't want to have these foods that were old and stale and fermented, because that would just make you sleepy, and meats like that, because it has to be old and aged, before you can eat it. And you didn't want all kinds of really stimulating kinds of food, like super salty and fried foods and caffeine, But in the middle there was traditionally in yoga a lacto-vegetarian diet, fruits, vegetables, nuts, seeds, whole grains, legumes. And they also said milk from healthy cows. But since there really isn't karma-free milk in the world today, it was a different world 4,000 years ago. It's a vegan diet for people who are really looking out for their spirituality. And in fact, I'm involved in the production of a beautiful documentary that's going to be out this fall called A Prayer for Compassion, about presenting veganism to people who identify as religious or spiritual.
That's really beautiful, and I can't wait to see that. So what I want to know from both of you is, when you first started out as vegan or plant-based, whichever it was, which one did you identify with the most, and which of those different aspects that I talked about before, and which one do you identify with the most today, sitting here right now?
Do you mean the reasons for going vegan? Or
well, I mean the environmental, the health, the human rights, the wave of the future, spirituality. Which one do you associate the best with right now, and which one was in your heart when you began?
Well, for me, it was vegetarian first, and I was in my late 30s, 100% meat and potatoes kind of gal, and was in Africa I ran a nonprofit organization, and we were there to open a safe house for girls. And while there at the celebration, a male elder brought in his most prized possession, which was a goat, and they subsequently slaughtered the goat and stewed the goat, and we were served that goat for dinner, and I became a vegetarian after dinner. So it was definitely motivated by that experience. I come from the Midwest. It's not like I didn't know where my meat was coming from, but this was a little bit different, sort of seeing it happen. And now, 16 years later, the last 8 of which I've been vegan, I am still completely ethically motivated, and I view my veganism as a matter of justice.
And like JL, the animals got me here. I tried to be vegetarian at 13 and didn't really know what to eat, and ultimately got really hungry and gave it up. But I always knew I would come back. I did get a boost toward vegetarian from the spiritual, because I was getting into yoga back when there were 3 books about yoga in the library, and I read all of them over and over and was really inspired to be vegetarian. Vegan was completely about the animals. We heard then about world hunger, but the connection never seemed really close. And we heard a little bit about the environment, but nobody knew then about climate change. So it was more of a tenuous connection. But the animals were very clear, very present, and very motivational. Now, for me today, I'm also really interested in the health. And I think part of it is a factor of age. I'm almost 68. I'll be 68 this month. And you see what happens when people get to this time of life. A whole lot of people are not doing really well. And so I want to do the very best that I can. And I do feel that I have done that for all these years, because I think just in cutting out the animal products, that really helps people. Just the fact that we're not consuming cholesterol, that we're consuming very little saturated fat, is a good thing. And what we know now, and I think this is something that wasn't known when I first got into this, was the flip side of what we don't eat is also what we do eat, and the tremendous healing qualities in fruits and vegetables. All the plant foods really, but fruits and vegetables and spices, for sure, they're food, and they're also medicine in a very good way. So I feel really, really fortunate to have discovered this when I did, and to be eating lots of pretty colorful foods today.
I love what you said about the flip side. And I think a lot of vegans do concentrate on what they're not eating. And what I seem to find, as a plant-based advocate who is vegan, I find it really sad sometimes when I see a large amount of people who are concentrating on what not to eat, and not necessarily concentrating on what they should be putting into their bodies, and expending so much energy, so much love, so much thought for the environment, for other animals, for everything else, but not taking care of themselves. And I think that there is a big turn right now in the vegan world, and a lot more people starting to look at health as an important factor in their lives. But I do find it really sad that there's so many vegans who are not taking care of themselves and don't have the energy, don't have the health to be able to go out and advocate the way that they want to long term, because they're just not making the right choices for them all the time. And again, I'm not talking about everybody. I'm just saying that I do see pockets and groups here and there. And as a health advocate, I want to help more.
Sorry, I'm glad you brought up health, because I think that's super important, that a lot of people that label themselves as vegan tend to sometimes forget about the health aspect, and they tend to focus very much on the animal rights or the environmental aspects of things.
As they should, because
Yeah,
that's
absolutely.
where they are. Yeah.
But they sometimes forget the compassion component when it comes to themselves. And I know we talked about compassion before, and they become compassionate about other beings and the environment, but they sometimes forget about being compassionate towards themselves. And I think that's a very important point, because it's easy for someone to be vegan and unhealthy. There's a lot of vegan food out there that's not good for you. And people lose sight of the fact that if they don't take care of themselves first, what good are they to anybody else? And for all the men that are listening who think it's so macho to eat meat and not cool, I mean, think about what you're doing to your body, and think about your health and how long you want to be on this planet to be able to raise your family and be with your kids and watch them grow. And think twice about what's going through your lips, because that's a very important thing to remember and think about. Nobody wants that, eh?
Well, I don't think you want to hear my response.
No,
absolutely.
We need to hear your response. This is one of the places where JL and I differ a little bit, which is kind of cool.
That's great.
Because very often when you have co-authors, they just finish each other's sentences, but we're actually two independent people.
Love it.
Well, and I don't think we differ that much. I think what I hear when you say that is...
We're taking a pause to let you know that this episode of the Plant Trainers podcast is sponsored by Health IQ. Health IQ uses science and data to secure low rates on life insurance for health-conscious people like runners, cyclists, triathletes, strength trainers, vegans, and more. We think Health IQ is crazy impressive and so innovative. We only tell you about products or services that fit into our values and that we could or would or do use ourselves. Despite the fact that we happen to be Canadian, we wanted to get the Health IQ experience so we could tell you more about it. Well, needless to say, we spent a Friday night taking their quizzes, and we recommend you do it too. Not only will you be able to save up to 33% on your life insurance by being fit, active, or being a compassionate eater, but you'll have a blast trying to beat the clock answering their skill testing questions. And the prize is peace of mind for you and your family and extra cash in your pocket, because they offer exclusive rates, but you have to qualify through one of their Health IQ quizzes. So put it on your calendar now and head to healthiq.com/planttrainers and take their quiz to see if you qualify and get your free quote today. If you call them, mention the promo code PLANTTRAINERS when you talk to the Health IQ agent. And now back to the show.
I feel like there's a lot of judgment in the vegan movement about being a good vegan. And are you WFPB? Are you Whole Foods? Are you no oil? Are you no salt? And all of these things that have nothing to do with veganism. Veganism is justice. Are we treating all beings in the world with kindness and compassion and speaking up for the voiceless? And there are humans who might choose to eat differently than you do. And I don't understand why people get so concerned saying, oh, I'm concerned for them because I'm concerned that they'll be better advocates for the animals. Meanwhile, they're out at Toronto Pig Save, giving pigs water before they go to bed. I don't think we need to go to bed, go to slaughter. I feel like this obsession with being concerned about adults who've made a decision to eat plant-based, but not maybe the plant-based that everybody else wants to, that's troubling to me. I think that people who are trying in the world to not harm animals and are eating vegan, if they're eating vegan, they're eating inherently better than they did when they were eating a standard American diet or a standard Canadian diet. And so then it becomes this gauge of like, how good or healthy are you? And I don't know. I just feel like that's one of the things that I find most troublesome in our movement right now is that.
I see where you're coming from 100%. And I do see judginess online. I do see judginess in conversations as well. But I think where we're coming from is where's the compassion for yourself? And we need to start with ourselves. And I try not to judge people, but in one of the ways where I really do judge people is when I see somebody riding a bicycle without a helmet. My first response in my own brain is, how selfish is that person? Because that person is a son, that person is a daughter, that person is a mother or a sister. And if something happens to them while they're on that bicycle, whatever injury occurs has the chances of being so much greater because they're not wearing a helmet. And I just think that we do see some people preaching compassion for others, but they're not showing compassion towards themselves, whether it be in a spiritual manner, whether it be for the foods that they eat, whether it be the relationships that they're in. And I just feel like I want to lend a hand to be able to help them to become the best them that they could be, the same way that they're trying to help everybody else, help every other being as well. Does that make sense?
I think it does. I mean, the way I see it is that those early vegans back in the UK in the 1940s didn't know if making this decision was going to literally kill them. Or I had one say, we didn't know if our bones would disintegrate or if we would die in a fortnight. And yet they stepped onto this very new terrain anyway, out of what this woman that I was talking to, who had been around at that time, called pure disinterested compassion. But what happened was really interesting. Most of these early vegans, and of course this was when there was really not a lot of vegan processed food, so they had to eat, pretty what we would call today healthy kind of vegan choices, because there wasn't a lot else. But most of them did so well, and they found that they were getting over diabetes, and their cholesterol was going down, and all these things that they hadn't expected. And yet there was another group who got very, very sick, and several died. And this was because of lack of vitamin B12, which now we know is just not negotiable. It's like, you want to be vegan, you take B12. It's like, I live in New York City, and I say to myself, you want to live in Manhattan, your mortgage is going to be high. Don't complain about it. If you don't like it, move somewhere else. If you don't want to take B12, don't be vegan. And so I think some of these very basic things that we need to do to take care of ourselves just really help veganism go forward as something sensible. But on the other hand, I meet young people who, if they were not vegan, they would be having pepperoni pizzas and chili cheese dogs, because that's the phase of life they're in. That's what their friends do. That's what they want to do. I'm thrilled that they can do that and be vegan. And I also think that we're so exposed to all the ideas, to the health, to the ethics, to the environment, that once you're vegan, you're going to learn about all this stuff. I mean, I knew nothing about environmentalism when I went vegan. And now, I'm pretty darn green. So I think if we just kind of step onto the walkway, like the moving walkway at the airport, it'll take us where we need to go.
I agree, because I didn't know a lot about the animals when we first made the change. I didn't know a lot about the environment as well. Global warming, that's all you hear, that's all you know. But now knowing so much, and you're right, you cannot learn everything at once, and you definitely need a starting point. I was really touched in the book. You told a story about Christine, who lived, I think, she was out in mid Canada, and she bought a lobster. Do you want to share that story with us?
Oh, yes, that was so wonderful. Well, JL and I both have, as you do, radio show podcasts, and it's so cool to talk to these people. And, every time you get somebody with a name, it's like, yes, I've got this person that a lot of people heard of. A lot of people are going to listen this week. And yet some of the best shows are with people that nobody was really heard of. However, people had heard of Christine for a while, because she got quite a lot of attention when she went into this grocery store and she saw somebody we've all seen, the lone lobster, left in the tank, and she just wanted to help him. So she went home and she read about where this kind of lobster came from in the North Atlantic, and how you could safely pack a lobster and ship him or her back home. So she went back to the store the next day. She bought the lobster. The guys at the UPS store helped to get the lobster packed up. Another animal rights person at the coastal area where the lobster needed to go picked him or her up and took the lobster to the sea. And she describes it so beautifully that for the first minute, the lobster was just kind of thinking about it,
Shell shocked, no pun intended.
Smell. Yeah, I don't know if he just figured, oh my gosh, this is home. But he just like leapt into the ocean. So it was a beautiful, happy story. Now, not everybody was thrilled about that. We talk about judgmentalism in the health. Well, there's judgmentalism in the ethical part of this too. And some people were saying, well, you bought that lobster, and so you were supporting the industry, and they'll just replace that one with another one. And, that's true. And yet sometimes your heart just tells you, this one, you're supposed to help. And she did, and I love it.
That's great. That's wonderful. I'm going to read that to my kids as a bedtime story one night. I'm going to pull that out. It's just such a nice, it's a nice little story. We love that. So talking about all of these judgments that we have within the vegan world and the plant-based world against each other or with each other or whatever you want to call it, there's also a lot of myths out there that people who maybe want to become vegan or don't want to become vegan have about being vegan. And the three that you talked about in the book were it being expensive, it being complicated, and it being weird. So I love the one about weird, and I want to get there. But in terms of it being expensive, we've talked about this before on many shows, and people lately have been asking me, I don't want to spend a lot on my grocery bills. What else can I buy that's cheap besides rice and beans? Because rice and beans seems to be known to be the cheapest now. But I really think that if people are staying away from all those superfoods, and I'm doing air quotes, and I'm talking about the exotic ones, because to me, kale and broccoli and cauliflower and rice, those are all superfoods to me. But if you stay away from those health food store superfoods, then your grocery bill doesn't really get that high. You just need to eat a little bit more than you would from before.
Yeah, I think this is JL. I think that sometimes we don't think of grocery shopping in the same way that we think of being one of those super shoppers, like with coupons, right? Like we go out and, you want to get a new appliance and you save your coupons for Bed Bath & Beyond or wherever, and you really think it through. But a lot of times people don't also realize that even at the grocery store, there can be a lot of things that marked down, sometimes for good reason. Like if you go into the produce section, a couple of my local grocery stores have a section where it's food that they're probably not going to keep selling after a couple of days. But I don't look at that as bad food. I look at that as food that I can get, like mushrooms or bananas or fruits or berries, and then do something with them when I get home. So I get them at a really reduced rate, but then I can take a bunch of mushrooms, throw them in my pressure cooker or my Instant Pot, and just kind of reduce them down and then put them in a baggie. And then suddenly I have something really flavorful, packed with umami that I could add to a stir fry or a soup later. So I think sometimes if we kind of get be a sleuth when we're going through the produce section, we can find some things that are really reasonable. And then other times we don't buy things because of sticker shock. So back to mushrooms, like shiitake mushrooms, like a lot of people will say, I'm not going to buy that because it's $8.99 a pound or $12.99 a pound. But if you're buying them for a recipe, I have a couple of recipes where it'll call for a half a cup of shiitake mushrooms. So when you buy the amount that would be a half a cup,
it's like $1.
$1.
It's so light. It's so light. You have to put it in perspective. It's not like buying apples at $8.99 a pound.
Exactly. And it requires math, which I hate to say because I was an English major and math makes me break out in hives. But if we actually go beyond just what we see, I think that can be really helpful. And then there are all kinds of things that we can buy. There's no reason to not have frozen fruit and vegetable in your freezer. I mean, we can buy fresh, and then there are things that we can buy frozen. And a lot of times the frozen foods will be on sale. And that not only will save you money, but on nights where you're feeling really lazy and you're thinking you don't have anything to eat, well, maybe that's the night to pull out the frozen edamame out, or to pull out some frozen corn and throw it into some veggie broth with some fresh vegetables and have a really quick soup. So I think that we, can kind of get creative as we go up and down the aisles and think about what can we buy in larger amounts, what can we freeze, what could we prepare in advance, and then have store and bagged and ready for the kids or ourselves when we're heading out the door for a quick meal.
And just like anything, I think it takes time and it takes exposure and it takes practice as well. So we want things right away. So your bill might be a little bit more expensive at the beginning because you're buying so much fruits and vegetables and you find they start to go bad in the back of the fridge. And then you kind of get into the swing of things and you understand how much you need, how much you don't, what you can buy frozen. And after a couple of weeks, you could actually see that grocery bill go down.
Absolutely.
And if you have the money, and I realize not everybody does, but if you're somebody who does have discretionary income, why not put a little bit more of it into eating really good food? Because far better to give it to the grocery store today than to the hospital tomorrow.
So when you say really good food, do you mean like fancy recipes?
Not necessarily, but just good food. For example, berries tend to be fairly expensive, and yet they are the antioxidant superstar. And maybe you want to be really rich to go with goji berries flown in from the Himalayas, but just your basic blueberries and raspberries, they're going to cost more than bananas and oatmeal and some of the other things. But to spring for that, for the sake of your future, I think of blueberries, for instance, and I'm a real fan of the frozen wild blueberries, which interestingly enough are quite a bit cheaper than the fresh ones. But if you cut a fresh blueberry, it's clear inside, but if you cut a wild blueberry, they're little tiny things, they're blue all the way through. And so they've got super antioxidant power, and it's an investment in yourself and, according to the National Institutes of Health, in your brain. A cup of blueberries a day is apparently, has been shown in at least one study, and I think several, to ward off Alzheimer's, even in people who carry the genes that would predispose them to that. So I don't know what Alzheimer's drugs go for, but I'd rather be eating blueberries, and they taste better.
Absolutely. And we don't have to make things complicated. It doesn't have to be the fancy recipes. It can be nice and simple and putting the money into the quality foods. I totally agree. But so tell us about this weird category, because that's kind of interesting. I mean, we talked expensive, we talked a bit about complicated, but tell us about the weird stuff. So what does it mean? Well, what does it mean when it's weird?
Well, I'd love to hear JL's take on this too. But for me, having started into the vegan world quite a while ago, when it was even weirder, I think that because it's a minority choice, it's really easy for people to attach stereotypes. So maybe it's the hippie stereotype, or it's the punk rock stereotype, or it's the health nut stereotype, or somebody who's just extreme, because to people who aren't vegan, it seems like an extreme way of life. But when I was researching this part of the book and I looked at the word weird and its etiology, it comes from late Middle English, a word that meant having the power to control destiny. And when I go out and buy those blueberries and think what they're going to do for my brain 20 years from now, it's like, yeah, those are weird berries because they're going to give me the power to control my destiny.
Well, all for weird then.
And I agree. I mean, I think it's just difference, right? I mean, I think that if it's different than what people are used to, then they think it's weird. My brother-in-law, whenever I go back home to visit in Illinois, will scrunch up his nose when I'm making all my vegan food. And then when I left, my sister was like, I think I'm going to start cooking a few more plant-based meals during the week. And so she just didn't tell him. And he was eating, like the soy crumbles and his spaghetti sauce. She was making tempeh. He didn't even know what tempeh was. He would eat whatever she put in front of him. So what was weird a week ago when I was doing it was dinner for him the next week. So
that's really cute. So yeah, he's maybe, you never know, right? Like he might make the switch. I love when people say to me like, oh no, but my husband can never do it. He's a meat and potatoes guy and he thinks you're a tree hugger and it's never going to happen for us. And then 6 months later, it's like, Shoshana, can you help me out with some recipes here? He's ready. And, it just kind of happens.
Well, that happened for both JL and me. I mean, when I met my husband, I actually wanted to date a meat eater. because I had had several years of always looking for spiritual, at least vegetarians, ideally vegans, and it had never turned out. They just seemed kind of
Weird.
Hypersensitive. I don't know. At least the ones that I had dated were not my destiny. And so I started dating this really nice man. The only thing that was wrong with him was that he ate meat. And I just decided, oh, well, he's not going to want to marry me or anything. Well, 2 weeks in, he stopped eating meat. And a few years after that, he had given up milk, and then he went completely vegan. And now, oh my goodness, he is so in for both the animals and the health. He is a major animal rights advocate. That came earlier. And then in the last 14 months, he started to eat predominantly raw food and really be interested in the health aspect of the thing. So I'm just like, wow, where do you find a guy like that? I guess you don't. You just allow.
So people can change.
Oh, absolutely.
Well, we all did.
Yeah, we all did.
I think he's being facetious there.
JL's husband did all the cooking when you were vegetarian, and then vegan happened. Well, you tell it. It's your husband.
Well, it's true. I mean, when I was in Africa and went vegetarian, I called my husband because I was going to be home in a couple weeks, and I needed him to know because he was the cook in the house at the time, and he cooked vegetarian for me for 8 years. But when I went vegan, he had no idea, and he's right. I mean, I didn't either. He didn't know what to make for me, what I needed, and then once I started cooking for myself, then, we would kind of cook together. He ate his way, I ate my way. We came up with our own boundaries, which was I was never going to buy an animal product nor make it. And then eventually the house became vegan as we moved from New York to Colorado. And then he, after seeing Cowspiracy, decided that he would, like it or not, be a vegan. And now he's basically, even though I make my living as a culinary instructor and food writer, he does most of the cooking in the house.
Yeah, well, you get enough of it during the day, so that's all right.
Definitely.
Never complain when a man cooks for you. Well, people know.
Is that a hint?
Well, no. I spent the first 10 years of our relationship pretending that I didn't know how to cook, just so that Adam would cook. And then about 2 weeks before Adam made the switch, he was complaining that we weren't getting enough meat and that I had made too many vegetarian meals and that we should be making more meat for dinner every night. And then 2 weeks later, he's like, I'm done with meat. I'm like, what? I'm like, okay, fish, done. Eggs, done. Dairy, done. And I'm like, what's going on? And Adam is an overnight guy. He was done, like cold tofu.
Yeah, I was
What
done.
caused that, Adam? What made you switch so rapidly?
Well, if you listen back, it's the tumor that started it. And then I kind of started finding ways to not have to have surgeries and not take medication. And then I just made the switch. And
He found out he had heart disease.
Yeah, beginning stage of heart disease. And it just all went away because I made the lifestyle change. And it was a crazy time.
As our listeners know, within a year of becoming plant-based and giving up all the meat, and all he did was the only other thing that changed is that he changed from being a hockey player to being more of a runner and triathlete. And within a year, the tumor shrunk, which was benign. The tumor shrunk. The heart disease cleared up from a one-way highway to a two-way highway, and he was performing better as an athlete. After that year, it was incredible. Yeah.
Yeah.
Love these stories.
Crazy times. But let's bring it all back to where we started, which was with your brand new cookbook, the Main Street Vegan Academy Cookbook, over 100 plant-sourced recipes plus practical tips for the healthiest, most compassionate you. And we're going to link to this book in our show notes, of course, so people could check it out. Let me ask you, do you have a favorite recipe in this book?
Wow. I'm going to change mine.
Oh, good. Have you been asked that question before?
Well, I had always said that it was this wonderful, easy, cheesy broccoli soup from Bonnie Goodman out in Wyoming, and that is really good. But we did a demo a couple of weeks ago here in New York at a Williams-Sonoma and made this buffalo chickpea dip from our graduate Britt Lasacco from Brooklyn. And oh my goodness, that stuff, it's I can't even describe it. I'm absolutely speechless. This is a baked, warm, amazing dip. So yeah, it's my favorite today, but I haven't made everything yet.
Sounds like we missed the boat for the Super Bowl on that one.
Yeah.
And you, JL?
I love Christine Day's beefless stew. I love it because I think that so many people, when going back to thinking that vegan is weird, I think a lot of times what they're really fearful of is giving up food memories and family memories around the table. And so I'm particularly fond of the recipes where our coaches found ways to create vegan versions of what are probably food memories for lots of people, and then make it really easy finding some of the best stuff out there at the grocery stores. She gives a couple options. You could do a homemade seitan, but you can also use a Gardein beefless tip, and it just has so much flavor, and it's comforting, and it's proof that anything anyone can eat, we can eat vegan.
I don't know, every time I open the book, I end up at this crisp mocha peanut butter bars page.
He's looking at it right now. He's going to be
part of
like,
the plan.
shush, let's go upstairs and make that.
It's beautiful. I mean, it's also Chef Shoshana, right?
Oh, it is Chef
But
Shoshana.
it looks beautiful, and we got to try that one too.
Well, that Shoshana is one of our graduates who actually is a professional chef. It's very interesting. People come to the academy with all kinds of backgrounds. So we have had a few chefs. We've had a couple of medical doctors, a couple of registered dietitians. And so everybody comes and brings their skill and their expertise. And everybody who gets the book can access that.
Well, that's just wonderful, and we love those recipes that you suggested. It's giving me some ideas for some things coming up. We're going to link to the book on our website in the show notes at planttrainers.com. Why don't you each take a turn? Let us know where you are on social media if people want to learn more about you and maybe even reach out.
You can find me at jlgoesvegan.com, and all of my social media is jlgoesvegan.
And you can find me at mainstreetvegan.net. And my social media is Main Street Vegan.
Oh, you make it so easy for us. Thank you so much. So like I said, we're going to link to that at the show notes at planttrainers.com. And we'd like to thank you both so much for spending time with us here today, talking about the book, talking about your memories, having a little bit of debate, which always makes it more juicy. So we really appreciate all opinions, and we're really, really thankful that you spent the time with us today.
Thanks so much to both of you.
Thanks for having us.
And thanks for all you do to get the message out. It's wonderful.
Thank you. That means a lot.
Thank you so much for listening to this edition of the Plant Trainers Podcast. Don't forget to subscribe on iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, or any other podcast listening platforms. We appreciate the feedback we receive from you. Every time we get a 5-star rating or review on iTunes from one of our fans, it ensures other people will find us too. Thanks to our patrons. To become a patron, visit www.patreon.com/planttrainers. Even supporting us with $1 really makes a difference. Connect and follow us on Instagram and Twitter at Plant Trainers. Like Plant Trainers on Facebook, join our newsletter, and check out our website at www.planttrainers.com for awesome plant-based recipes and a list of our services. Email your questions to info@planttrainers.com so we can answer them on our upcoming Facebook Lives. We hope we've inspired you today. Join us again next time, and have a healthy day.